At least 250 Ukrainian troops with their UN peacekeeping mission in Democratic Republic of Congo have returned home to help fight Russian forces. When the withdrawal of Ukraine's aviation unit was announced in March, diplomats warned it could leave the UN mission seriously short of helicopters. They argued that the Ukrainian contingent is vital in the fight against the various rebel groups based in the thick forests of the eastern DRC. The 8 Ukrainian helicopters made up about a third of the UN fleet since the Russian invasion in February. Ukraine has put out its troops from the other UN peacekeeping missions where they have been deployed. The DR Congo's Parliamentary Defense Committee says the withdrawal is serious. As the Ukrainians left DR Congo, the Brazilian commander of the UN force, General Marcos da Costa, said their 10 years of immense contribution is greatly appreciated. The UN mission in DRC is already under pressure. It is widely criticized, though, for failing to do enough to restore peace in the east, where numerous armed groups have operated for 3 decades, killing, raping and looting the region's rich minerals resources such as gold and diamonds. Right, we speak now to African Affairs analyst Nixon Katembo about the latest development. Nixon, a very good evening to you. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. I'd like to just latch on to some of that sentence that although the UN peacekeeping mission is important, unfortunately it's also faced criticism for being ineffective. So just what will be the impact of this withdrawal?
Well, I think this withdrawal will have an impact on the UN operation itself within the DRC, although it's not a significant number, rather, of the troops that are going, but they were involved in a critical supply and the logistical chain in the DRC, mostly in the Air Force, flying helicopters and other logistics to other forces within the mission. So having 250 Ukrainian troops leaving, they leave that particular void within the UN mission itself, and owing to the fact that is almost 1% of the total numbers of the UN mission in the DRC.
I mean, as we mentioned, that it is said that their role was particularly significant when it came to the aviation units that they supplied, particularly that of tracking down insurgents or rebels in the region. Are you able to just share with us how they are strategically deployed?
Well, most of them, they were strategically deployed in a sense of providing reconnaissance information to the UN troops, the dangers that they might face in terms of the ground troops, and also kind of identifying areas that are prone to rebel attacks, especially when it comes to providing critical information to the ground troops. So I think that is the most critical aspect of their operation, apart from the logistical supply. But when one look at the DRC's MONUSCO's operations in its totality and its impact on the local population, there really not much that has been significant in terms of impacting on the lives of the civilians, because you would recall that there have been protests here and there asking the very same UN forces to leave. In fact, the Ukrainian leaving was kind of somehow ironically celebrated by some of the people within Eastern DRC, saying that the rest of the UN mission should follow suit what the Ukrainians have done.
Has there been any tangible difference in the departure of, as you mentioned, the Ukrainian troops themselves had to leave in order to join their brethren to fight the conflict with Russia? So was that felt? And do the people in the regions that they are involved in peacekeeping missions as you mentioned, really feel like if the whole peacekeeping mission would leave, it really wouldn't make that much of a difference in terms of securing their own personal security, because they still end up sleeping in forests. Their communities end up being attacked, burnt, raped, etc.
Well, and that is the bone of contention. So whether the mission itself is still effective in terms of its own mandate in the wake of different attacks on the civilians. And I think it's now upon the United Nations and the government of the DRC to reflect deeply on how to restore peace and security in the region, particularly also in the United Nations to take a deep reflections on the past 21 years that they have been in the DRC and whether it's yielding the necessary results that are expected in terms of securing the DRC. I should mention, though, that the primary responsibility of the state lies on the DRC government and its constitutional mandate to protect the civilians and the borders of the country. So that cannot be abrogated to the United Nations at the same time. So one of the things that could have been a concerted effort actually to restore a civilian kind of a peace to civilian in the region. Unfortunately, that has not been the case, and that's why there has been there was a protest calling for the mission to go, but also, ironically, also for the government of the DRC seems to be pulling the string behind the scenes in kind of inciting the local populations against the United Nations itself. Despite the accord that have signed again with the United Nations to have those peacekeepers there.
If the government, Nixon, is to go back to the drawing board, and I'm thinking here, while looking back at a pledge made just several weeks ago by given that the DRC has now joined the Eastern Bloc, the Eastern Regional Bloc, and they've said they're going to come together and send peacekeeping missions there to try and end the conflict. And we also know the AU has at times also tried to deploy forces there to try and bring an end to the conflict. We've had this discussion over and over again, but should the DRC government look at the situation in its entirety and say it's going back to the drawing board, the deployment of peacekeeping missions, how should that be re-looked at?
I think the deployment of the peacekeeping mission should be playing a supporting role, in my view. One of the critical things that the DRC should do, and we've spoken about this before, is doing security sector reform within the country, making sure that strengthen the institutions of the state, particularly with the security cluster, in making sure that the DRC army is retrained and equipped with the necessary equipment to fight or fend off any insurgency that might occur in the region. I don't think that the deployment of various peacekeeping missions will add value to the already fragile situation there, where the UN has failed for the past 21 years. And even the East African standby force is already, some of its member states have already made a commitment and they have deployed there. Kenya last year deployed quite a number of soldiers in support of the UN mission. Tanzania is already there. Uganda already deployed troops there after agreement with the DRC. So it's a kind of a deja vu that is happening. And you would recall that this DRC problem is a more complex one because already the very same some of the East African member states have a vested interest in the DRC since the conflict started in 1996. So whether that is solved at at a macro level, diplomatically, for these different stakeholders within the DRC, but also outside the DRC, particularly with the neighbors. I think that's the most important aspect that need to be looked at rather than just looking at the deployment of forces. You cannot have various army within a territory or a country which claim to have sovereignty. That leaves it somehow, for the lack of a better word, naked to external forces, and therefore continuous insecurity for the country. The country and the government of the DRC have to take control of whatever is happening, because all forces have at least have to be under one command.
Nixon, always a pleasure to speak to you. African Affairs analyst Nixon Katembo just speaking to us about peacekeeping mission of Ukraine, particularly part of MONUSCO, leaving the DRC to support its own efforts in their country.